My father was an engineering draftsman at Hanford, and I was, depending on what the months were, I was probably 3 or 4 years old.
When you went there?
When I lived there in one of those B duplex houses. So my mother, my father, and I lived in those duplexes, and of course I was this little kid, playing around.
What was his name?
His name's Lester Orlan, O-R-L-A-N, Keen, K-E-E-N.
And what was your mother's name?
It was Doris Bramhall Keen. Bramhall was B-R-A-M-H-A-L-L.
Family name?
Family name,
yeah.
Right.
And how old was he when he went there, do you know?
Well, he's 3 years older than I was, so he would have been 33, 34, something like that. My mother was 4 years younger than me.
And where did he come from? Where did you all come from?
I was born and actually ended up growing up in Walla Walla, which was only 30 miles away, a nice little farming community, not that little, 30,000 I guess. But at the time he got to Hanford, I am fairly sure that he was working as a draftsman up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho at the Farragut Navy base, because he talked about that and he showed me pictures of it. And what was kind of intrigued me was the fact is when I was born in 1940, he had a house built for the three of us, a brand new house, so that after my mother came home from the hospital, we could move into this house and be a family. And I'm not sure if we moved in and then we moved out to go to, Coeur d'Alene and then to Hanford or what the story was, but I'm pretty sure they ended up for rent. Mm. But in reflecting on it afterwards, it was interesting to me because my mother, nor my dad were ever really complainers, they would kind of suck it up. So I never remember my mother or my dad complaining about, how cramped it was or how small, because this B duplex arrangement must have been like a quarter the size of the house that we had in Walla Walla.
Sort of like an apartment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But for some reason they never complained. But the story I remember vividly, because my dad told over and over, and he passed away just about 9 years ago. Huh. Was that the first day they moved into the to the complex, and of course they lived in Walla Walla, so that, they knew that Hanford was kind of a dusty, hot place, so that was no surprise. But their particular bedroom was on a corner, so it had windows on each wall. It was very hot, so they threw the windows open and went to bed. And when they woke up in the morning, according to my father and my mother, there was an inch of dust all over them, on their faces, on their beds, on the clothes that were beside the bed, the whole thing, and they just said, "Whoa, what is this?" Welcome to Richland.
Yeah, I can believe it.
So, and my mother always was kind of a cleanliness was a big deal with hers.
What did she do?
I don't know because I didn't recall the stories after that. And the thing was too, Richard, that as I think almost everybody, they took the security, the secrecy so seriously that even decades later, when my dad was in his 90s before he passed away, I had a very hard time getting him to talk about Hanford.
So there was never a time after the war when he was told, okay. I mean, because they opened it up at the end of the war. Right?
I don't think they told him. I honestly don't, because I kept thinking to myself, when does this secrecy stuff expire? I mean, reading it in the newspapers, books and everything, and I tried to explain it to my dad, but he just wasn't sure if I had my story right,
Oh.
So what he did tell me was that, and I thought it was an insight into his work, that as a draftsman, doing blueprints, he said, of course, we never knew what we were doing a blueprint for, right? And he said, all I knew was it might be a 3-foot corner of some building for some undeterminate purpose. And maybe it's only 3 feet by 3 feet that I'm drawing. So it's just like a little piece of the big jigsaw puzzle.
Strange.
Yeah, and then he said also that they had, of course, different groups of draftsmen, in probably a big room, I would guess, right? And they had teams. So he could not talk to another team of draftsmen. He could talk to his team, I believe, right? But even at lunch, they could not have lunch together. That was,
Not even socialized.
Yeah.
Wow.
I know. Maybe within his own team, I guess, and I guess certainly we socialized with neighbors, We lived on Farrell Lane in Richland, so.
Farrell was spelled how, do you remember?
It's Farrell.
Yeah.
So where the Gone with the Wind mansion was at the end that I just showed you there.
Oh, so that was the house
That
in
was
the photograph.
that was our neighbor's house because we lived in the B duplexes, so they were just very small. And I always remember those in my mind, kind of the gray shingles, just kind of a box with a roof on it, and that kind of stuff. But I do remember because I had a friend, I guess a guy I liked to play with, or a girl, I don't know. So we'd walk down to the mansion, and knock on the door, can they come out to play? And I remember many times doing that and thinking, oh, this is a big deal. I get to go down to the house at the end of the street, But then I thought, geez, if I was only 3 or 4, would my mother let me walk down there? Because it would have been almost a block, right? Or would she have taken my hand? But I have no memory of being accompanied because I was like a big kid on my own, I guess.
So tell me when you were born, what year?
1940. October 2nd, 1940.
So that puts you 3 or 4 years old.
3 or 4, right.
It's 1943 or 44. That's when Hanford really opened up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And since he was in the construction side, my guess is it would have been
Of course.
43 and maybe early
Yeah.
44.
So his drawings and plans weren't for the machinery, it was for the actual buildings.
That's the way he described it, yes.
Yeah.
I would guess that's because that's what his work was, his line of work anyway, his occupation was buildings.
Right.
Blueprints for buildings.
How did you get there? Just by car or?
I'm fairly sure, I don't honestly remember.
Yeah.
We did have a 1939 Terraplane, I remember, which is kind of a cool car.
Great car.
Very 30s, 40s
Yeah,
car.
right.
So chances are we drove. I do remember my dad telling me before my mother and I moved over there with him. I don't know what the delay was, maybe getting the duplexes built. He talked about having to drive every day from Walla Walla to Richmond, which is 30 miles each way. And in those days, old roads and cars and that kind of stuff. And there's like 5 or 6 guys in the car, and they just did that every day back and forth. So that must have been a really long, tiring day.
Yeah. Yeah,
Somehow-
and then put in a full workday around that.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm sure he was glad to not only get us over there, but to be able to live at least in Richmond.
So was this a big complex of houses? Was it like a suburb? Or housing development, I guess?
Well, it was a housing development,
Yeah.
because the Corps of Engineers built these developments specifically for the workers. So I'm fairly sure that like our portion would have been just like a U, with the mansion in the bottom of the U, right? And then all these B duplexes, these little duplexes kind of alongside. So best I could tell, there might have been, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 duplexes on each side of the street, and then the mansion at the cul-de-sac. But that was just one of many. So of course I don't really have memory of anything except those houses, and then maybe going to a movie or a bowling alley or something like that.
Things that they had built as part of the complex.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
To make it a town, it was a
Yeah.
town from scratch. Right?
Where did you go for groceries?
Do not remember.
Yeah.
But
When do your memories start? What are some of the earliest memories you have of this time?
well, it would be like walking down to the mansion for my friends,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of playing on the porch. This little 1-step, 3-foot, 3-foot step to go into the front door. And I do remember playing in the backyard. It seems to me that behind this row of duplexes, there was kind of an open space. And I think it was really a play area. I think that's exactly what it's for. And it seems to me that we used to go out there and play with other kids, and maybe the guys
Yeah.
would, play a little, baseball or something. I don't know. But it was like kind of a little park. Yeah, the picture I showed you of the mansion, in my mind, up until about a month ago when I found that picture. So it's been going on for a long time. In my mind, I mean, it was a 4 or 5-story mansion with these great, Gone with the Wind pillars, 3-foot diameter pillars.
Like a southern plantation.
Southern plantation, exactly. I mean, what else did I have to, kind of
Yes.
reflect on it? So then when I saw that picture, I said, oh my gosh, those are 2 little 4x4 posts there holding up that little roof.
What was the function of this particular house?
Well, yeah, I was trying to figure that. I mean, it
Yeah.
was a living place because I went down to play with the kids, right? But I'm thinking maybe it was somebody who, had some extra status or responsibility. Wouldn't you think, maybe?
Yeah, yeah. Just the way at Los Alamos, they had bathtub row for the big guys, and everybody else got duplexes.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
But I just remember we had, of course, neighbors, but I don't really remember what they were doing or who they were. But somebody had to have some status somewhere to.
Oh,
that
sure.
house was twice the size of our B duplex in terms of square feet, I'm sure.
And it was new. It wasn't just something that.
Yeah, I think they all were new.
Yeah, yeah. They
I
would
think they
have.
all were brand new.
Huh, funny. Wonder why they built them like that. That's curious.
I know.
Because these housing developments, both at Oak Ridge and at Hanford, were some of the first planned suburbs in the United
I
States.
did not know that.
Yeah, with fire department and grocery store and those were all built in as part of the schools. I mean, they were some of the first planned communities in America.
Which means that, excuse me, they didn't have a lot to go on in terms of learning how to do that. Right?
No, that's right.
Just like
yeah.
the building of the bomb.
Yeah. Innovation again, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So that is definitely kind of cool.
Do you remember the day they announced what this whole installation was for, the day after the bombs were dropped?
No, I did not ask my dad that because, again, he was so skittish about
Yeah.
the secrecy of it.
Yeah.
But I was I'm very curious. I wish I could ask him now, my mom
Oh, yeah,
too.
yeah. Because I've seen photographs of just screaming crowds around Hanford, cheering and throwing their hats in the air.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
What strikes me, though, is from a secrecy point of view, would you really want to instantly tell the enemy what this was and where it came from?
Well, which enemy? The war was over.
Well,
We hadn't officially stamped the Soviets as enemies yet.
yeah, right.
I remember vividly, I'm about 3 years older than you are. I was born 1937. I remember puzzling at the age of 8 and 9. Wait, the Soviets are our noble brothers. Why are they, what did they do wrong? So, and I think there was a lot of effort to publicize because Groves was keenly aware of how much money he'd spent. Wanted to be sure everyone knew that it was well used.
And today, were you there when Alex was talking about all this research that he did, Alex Olderstein?
Yes, some of it.
So he said it was about a $2 billion project in US dollars in 1943, 44.
Yeah.
That seemed low to me. It really did.
Well, but that works out to be 20, 30 billion. I always say it cost about the same, excuse me, as it cost to put a man on the moon, which I think gives you a better perspective on what
And
it
what
cost.
would that have been?
Sorry?
What would that have been to put a man on the moon?
Well, that cost us about 20 or 30 billion dollars.
Okay. When in the 60s.
Yeah, in
so.
60s dollars.
Right.
Today it'd probably be 60 or 70 billion.
Yeah.
Somebody told me it was almost 1% of the U.S. national.
Yeah, a noticeable amount, right?
Yeah.
That's for sure. Well, I had occasion about 8 years ago to finally get on the Hanford site and take the Department of Energy tour of the big reactor, which was just an outstanding experience because, they only had those tours open certain months and certain days of the year.
Yes.
Stuff like that. But not only just because, my parents were so much a part of it, but just to actually go to that big reactor and look at those control rods and that control room with the crude dials. And it's just, it just boggled my mind. I mean, it was awe-inspiring. It was, it really was like a skyscraper,
Yeah.
in its own time. But it was a great experience. So that's another reason why I'm so happy that, you and Cindy and so many other people have just made this Manhattan Project Park happen. I mean, I just think it's just an incredible contribution
Yes.
to the U.S.
Yeah.
and to our future generations.
Yeah. So what did you guys do for recreation? Did you ever go to the river or anything like that?
Well, we did when I got home, but at Hanford, I just do not recall. But yeah, that's what my dad did with me and my mother. We went picnics on the river. And I'm sure we would have at Hanford, right? Because it's right there in the Columbia.
Yeah.
I'm sure we would have gone down there and picnics and,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff.
So just a little early in terms of memories. So when did you guys leave Hanford? Or did you? I mean, did you stay there?
Yeah, no, we left, I'm guessing, in sometime in 1944, because when I was 5 in 1945, I went to kindergarten, and I'm pretty sure I went to kindergarten in Walla Walla.
Huh.
So, and then, the construction, Alex's timeline,
Sure,
kind
of course.
tapered down from
Yeah.
44. So I'm thinking, and because he was just working on the blueprinting, which is even before the construction, I'm thinking we probably came home in, early 45 or late 40, probably late 44.
That surprises me. I didn't even think about the fact that some people would have cycled in and out according to the phase of development that was
Right.
going on. Sure.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's hard because my father went on to take over his grandfather's construction project, so they were kind of the leading contractor in Walla Walla. So I kind of became part of that, see what that industry is all about. So construction is not an easy task. I mean, even you
No.
put together a building like this one, it's like it's tricky. So to do it in the Manhattan project at Hanford and Oak Ridge, and it kind of boggles the mind, right? Because it's all these little pieces, and only a few people know how they put together, and how it's hard to do it right when you know what it is. Right?
Yes. Right.
So it was another just admirable quality of how they really pulled it off.
There must have been someone higher up who was looking at the whole thing from one point of view, wouldn't you think?
But even then, I mean, just like my dad doing the 3-foot sections on some building, right? But surely there were mistakes, and people, and in construction, you got to get the seams right?
Right.
And I've heard people say that, generally speaking, the construction at least around Hamburg was really quite well done, all things considered, right? So they must have had some redos. It said, oh man, there was some communication problem, and the draftsman didn't quite understand or whatever, right? So that was all about it, and yet, as Alex pointed out today, it still got done within
That's
time
true.
before the invasion.
Yeah.
Just really outstanding. So let's see, I think that was kind of the main points, Richard, that really stuck on my mind. I guess, and as I was thinking about my mother just every now and then saying things through the decades, though, I do think the dust was the one thing that really was the hardest for her to do it. Here it is, a mother of a 3- and 4-year-old, right, and strange place, and hot and dusty, and you don't know anybody, just like so many other tens of thousands of families, right? Must have been really difficult. And it had to have been a culture shock too, but she never complained about it afterwards.
I think there was a certain amount of depression and difficulty with some people who just couldn't face the stress of displacement and loneliness and isolation, and then, as you say, dust and wind.
And the dust storm, because we had those same dust storms in Walla Walla when I was growing up, so those dust storms are like a tornado with dirt.
Oh.
Except it's just so fine that literally you cannot shut your windows tight enough to keep it out. So it's quite an experience, to say the least. But it was a great experience. It was something that my family was always proud of.
Yeah, it's recent.
To even though if you kind of stumble on it by accident, but at least you were there to kind of.
So your dad wasn't enlisted or drafted into the war?
No, he wasn't.
Was he too old, too young, disabled?
I think no, and I don't. He was not disabled or anything like that.
Or special skills.
He was born in 1910, so see, he was like 30 when we went, maybe even 29.
Yeah.
So excuse me, 33. So 20. Yeah. Somehow or another, he slipped through the cracks. He might have been just a little bit too young for the drafts, and too old to be recruited except through this project.
Well, 33 would have been old.
Right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, until later in the war, by which time he would have had some kind of exemption because of his work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But as far as I know, he didn't take that job to stay out of the military. He just took it because it was a good opportunity, and maybe the fact it was close to home. I don't know. Maybe that was part of it too. So in a big adventure.
Yeah.
So.
Wonderful. Is there anything you can think of that we have not covered?
Well, probably when I walk out the door.
Well, you've got notes there. Anything on your notes?
Yeah, absolutely. So, no, I asked my son, who I'm 30 years younger than my father, and my son is 30 years younger than I am, and my grandfather is 30 years older than I am. So it's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
Went through 4 generations. So I asked my son if my father had ever told him, you know, as they were just together one-on-one or something, you know, through the years, anything about this. And he reported kind of the same thing. No, Lester was, you know, kind of, didn't talk about it much, but then he said he did tell me about building pieces, I mean, doing blueprints of pieces. In this case, he told my son it was like a concrete wall, like a 3-foot concrete wall. Could have been the B reactor, could have been the basement on a canteen. I mean, who knows, right? Who knows? But that's all he would share with his son. So, it wasn't just me. He was kind of mum to everybody.
Well, you wonder who built that huge Queen Mary.
Oh yeah,
I mean, mostly poured concrete to be sure, but still. Just the
and that's another thing too. You know, pouring concrete is a very big deal in construction. So, and I saw my father build buildings in Walla Walla where they poured concrete, you know, multiple stories high. So that's an process very easy to screw up too, if you don't have everything right. So once again, this whole piecemeal approach for secrecy.
Yeah.
Somehow they got it all together and it came out in time. I mean, it's a total miracle in my opinion.
I always remember the story of how they assembled the equipment in the Queen Marys, which had to be operated by remote control once they started processing spent fuel. They had the guys use the remote control to assemble the equipment. By the time they got everything built, they really knew how to run the remote control systems.
I'll bet they did.
Yeah, which with television cameras, early television cameras and everything.
Yeah, TV in the
I
early
know.
40s. Huh?
Yeah, it wasn't very high resolution, but it worked. Yeah. Well, good.
Yeah, and they were, I mean, I don't think anybody understood how dangerous the whole thing was.
Yeah.
Maybe some of the physicists kind of suspected, but
Well, yeah.
generally speaking, I don't think.
They knew the kind of energies that were being handled, but
Yeah,
a lot of people didn't.
But even go through the B reactor, you know, and you know, they showed us the rods, and then, you know, how the spent rods were then processed in kind of a liquid, you know. It was great opportunities for people. I mean, I'm sure probably from time to time they did get excessive radiation.
Well, and there was the reason they put those things out in the middle of nowhere.
That's right.
Gross.
And I just read that there was 9 of those reactors operating at the same time.
Yeah, by the end of the war.
That's a lot of reactors.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Cranking out plutonium, and not all that much. I mean, we really had enough for 2 bombs at the beginning of August.
Yes.
That's 50 pounds, maybe less. Well, 6 kilograms per bomb core.
Is that what it is?
So they had 12 kilograms.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, thank goodness at least they saved the B reactor, because I think when I took that tour, there was one other reactor that was still standing, but it was encased in concrete. It was entombed. The other reactors, I don't know, do you know what the other 7, are they gone completely?
I think they were taken down long ago.
Maybe so.
Yeah.
So I guess the radiation from that one they entombed was...
You know, they dug huge trenches near the sites and put the cut up pieces of, actually, I'm thinking of something slightly different. Naval reactors are cut up in huge chunks and put in a trench, with the trench open to the sky, so that the Russians, because of our treaty agreements, can confirm that those ships' reactors were dismantled and are being thrown away. And then I guess eventually cover them over. I know.
Yeah, it's incredible. You know, that's one other thought I had too. Again, when I took the B reactor tour, must have been 2006, 2007, something like that. They also showed us where they were still monitoring and reclaiming all the radioactive waste, because that's an ongoing Department of Energy Superfund side or something, right?
Yeah.
And it really hit home just how radioactive and how difficult it is to handle those things. So they showed us some drums that they had dug up from under, because the drums were like leaking.
Yeah, yeah.
And then they had to re-encase them and do other kinds of stuff too. But there was, I don't know how much we're spending every year on the cleanup just for Hanford, but it's got to be something.
The estimate is that the cleanup of the whole Manhattan Project site will cost as much as the Manhattan Project did.
I could believe that. Just even seeing all the work that was going on there, you know, in 2006.
The official explanation that I've always heard is, you know, we thought there's a war on, the Cold War, And as long as we kept it inside the fence, it was okay.
Who knew?
Yeah, well, I mean, they should have known. They knew they'd have to clean it up eventually.
Yeah.
So, but that was the attitude. It was a pretty cavalier attitude.
Yeah, I'm sure it was.
Yeah.
And you know, the some of these leaking drums they dug up fairly recently, you know, was they lasted a long time, but once they started leaking, and then of course, then what do? You got the whole problem all over again, right?
Yeah.
So,
Well, they're going to glassify all that stuff.
is that right?
Yeah. Built a big plant to convert it into glass,
Oh,
which is a good technology because glass is a very permanent material. The French use that to put away their commercial nuclear waste. They
is that
glassify
right?
it.
Is
Yeah.
that right? Okay, so we don't have to just keep trying to bury them for the
Yeah,
next 10,000
right.
years.
Once it's in glass, it'll stay there. Then they can really bury it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is great.
Good. Thank you
All
very
right.
much.
Thank you, Richard,
Yeah.
very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, my pleasure.